of your request. Today, we'll be looking at Banzai, Imperial Japanese Forces in the Pacific Theater. It is one of the last version 3 supplements to be released, and you definitely do see a bit of the transition over to the version 4 style. For the first thing that I noticed is that it is incredibly short. Only, I think 50 pages. 45 pages. 50 pages. And, well, it just focuses on one specific army. But this did come out at the same time as Gung Ho, which was the American version that showcased the US Marine Corps. And, in my opinion, has some of the best US lists. I like bringing the doggo. Doggo is best dog. Anyway, the Japanese book Banzai represents entirely Japanese forces in the Pacific Theater, so you will not be seeing any of the force options to make, say, the Kuomintang Army, which was in Manchuria, which honestly probably would have been a better choice for late war Flames of War, because unlike the Pacific forces, the Manchurian forces of the Japanese were well-equipped, modernized tanks. They had half-tracks. They often actually had German half-tracks that were produced under license. So, you'd still be able to use German vehicles, but with Japanese troops inside. They were equipped with more machine guns than anybody else, more SMGs. Most of the Pacific forces were kind of conscripts, for lack of a better word. They were just kind of trained as quickly as possible and sent out to fight. Whereas the Manchurian forces were actually the hardened core of the army. But, I digress. Back to the actual book. I've gotten requests that I do a bit more history. So that's kind of why I ramble like this. Plus, again, YouTube tells me that ramble more and it's better for your channel. So, you guys only have yourselves to blame. So inside you see a brief little summary of what's going on. You see a nice little map of the actual Pacific Ocean. Very specific, that ocean. Then you see Japan's Pacific War, which includes a little map of all the Japanese gains. I kind of skip over the history portion, you guys know this, because I feel like you guys, come here for the review of the actual units. I do like this, though, that they include the fact that the Imperial Navy and the Imperial Army in Japan really hated each other. Like, it's almost impossible to compare to any other nation how much these two forces hate each other. Like, they would go on suicide missions as a basic giant game of one-upsmanship. Like, oh, your forces stood to defend the last islands of Iwo Jima? We'll send our greatest battleship on a suicide mission, that'll show you. Yeah, no, they were pretty weird, those two. The fact that they were from the same nation rather than, like, rival nations is odd, looking at the history of how they interacted. But, anyway, let me get back on point. Here we have the Japanese special rule. And I will be kind of giving both the version 3 and the version 4 review here. So, first you have Banzai charge, which means that your forces, after making the first attempt to charge in, if they are driven back, may roll a motivation to attempt to charge in a second. In fact, not even may, must attempt to charge in a second time after rolling motivation. And you get a second round of defensive fire, and if you're driven off that time, you're driven off for real. But, it can be really good. Like, let's say you barely secured those 5 hits to pin them down, and then they come running right back in, and your forces are then caught unaware. Especially with a nice 3-up save that infantry have. Next you have Kendo, which means all your infantry command teams, gun command teams, everything but tank command teams basically, get to roll a 2-up for close combat hits, regardless of what type of training they have, because they have katanas. Now, the only complaint I kind of have about this is that I really wish it applied to tank teams as well, because tank commanders were issued katanas. And there are some cases that's reported in the battles of the Philippines where tank commanders would use their katanas. Mostly outside of the tank, but because bailed out tanks can fight for Japan, which is the actual very next rule, I believe it'd be very prudent to be able to use your sword still if you were bailed out. I think that'd be a cool little twist on the rule. But anyway, I really like it. I really like that it gives Japan that flavor. And even if you're like charging in to deal with their artillery, you might be facing a bad day because they're going to hack your men apart with their katana, with swords. It's silly, but I love it. Next you have no surrender. Japanese tanks do not count as bailed out when it comes to morale. So basically they're either absolutely destroyed or they count as still alive. So your tanks don't run away, basically. Because you'd have to, well, especially in version 4, you'd have to get it down to 1 tank. Because otherwise you have enough tanks to automatically pass your morale tests. And even then, you're passing your morale tests on a 3-up because all Japanese tanks are fearless. You have to be fearless to climb in a Japanese tank, I'll tell you that much. And they can still fire their machine gun, their turret machine gun, so that's nice as well. I mean, you're probably going to remount on a fearless check, but if you don't, at least you can fire something. And you can still attack in close combat, which is what I was getting at earlier with the kendo rule. And they are still captured if the rest of your tanks break off from an assault. So if they break off, basically you lose those tanks still because they still can't move, even though they're still manned. The idea behind this is that Japanese tank crews, if their tank was immobilized, would often get the machine gun from the rear of the turret. It was removable, so you would use it, basically hit fire it, or mount it on top of your tank to try and defend your tank while the rest of your crew worked to repair it. So I'm assuming that's the reason they are using for why they can still fight on. With Japanese tanks in real life, it really didn't come up too often because a hit on a Japanese tank was a kill more often than not. Though the heavy tanks that the Americans use sometimes, some of the Easy 8s and such, actually had a problem with over-penetrating Japanese tanks. So they'd accidentally fire straight through the tank because the armor was so thin. So that was a case that would occasionally save a Japanese tank. But overall, in real life, you generally wouldn't just kill the tank if you hit it. Even a bazooka would kill the tank. Even a .50 caliber could kill the tank at close range. Next you have Senshin, which is the big Japanese rule, the one you played Japan for. Your unit will, your company, or actually your company or your regiment, they can bring regiments as well, will never run away, ever. No matter what happens on the battlefield, your men will never lay down and surrender. Well, your infantry, your tanks will. Which I don't like as well. But I think it's a further nerf to Japanese tanks that they really don't need. But your Japanese infantry will always remain on the battlefield. If you fail a company or a platoon morale check, the affected infantry will instead basically just try and charge the enemy until either they or the enemy is dead. So, it can be really effective, and also the thing with Senshin is that it does give you a nice small bonus in that you automatically pass all motivation tests after you've drawn in your Senshin. It represents that Japanese fervor. As one Japanese war veteran said, we wept, we cried because we would be faced with the curse of living to adulthood. They were really fanatical. They wanted to die rather than live through the battle. They'd rather die killing the enemy than live through the battle and try and, have victory another day. It was a weird mentality. I mean, I guess not that weird. I mean, you have in the UK, we'll fight them on the beaches, we'll fight them on the streets. It was that exact same kind of mentality, if you really think about it. I don't think it makes Japan as foreign as a lot of historians kind of try and make it. And, of course, in the Soviet Union, you had people who didn't even need Order 227. Sorry. And I get sidetracked, but you guys love it. You know you do. Next, you have Human Bullet, which is probably the second biggest Japanese advantage in the game. They get Nikohaku teams, which means Human Bullet. You get to basically have guys with mines on sticks that run out and smack them on top of the tank. And it worked really well. Historically and in-game, it works incredibly well. So these teams automatically pass their morale check to Banzai charge if there's a tank nearby. And even if their platoon breaks off after Banzai charge, they still attack the tanks. Only tanks, though. They won't suicidally charge infantry. And here's their big thing. Not only are they improvised anti-tank 5, which is massive because most tanks have a top armor of 1, but they each roll 4 dice. But however, the improvised tank assault does mean that if they roll a 1, they blow themselves up as well. So these are quintessentially suicide troops. And they will not break off so long as there is a tank near them. So basically, if you're facing a tiger list, bringing these guys is almost a guaranteed win. Because you'll just run in and you'll never break off. And you'll just beat them into submission. Oh man, you got a lot of... Japan has a lot of special rules. It's basically the only way they could find to make Japan at all effective, because Japanese technology was just way below everyone else. I remind you, this is not even 100 years after they came out of the feudal age, basically. It's kind of crazy. I mean, I guess more Renaissance, but still, imagine Renaissance Italy 70 years later being thrown into World War II. Yeah, you can understand why they didn't have the best equipment. So you've got banners, which are the... Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, I had to remind myself of what banners did. So banners basically make you ignore the first hit from everything but flamethrowers and snipers. So that first hit of the artillery doesn't pin you down. The first hit of defensive fire doesn't contribute to the ones you need to be pinned down. The first shot of... Basically, the first shot doesn't matter for morale unless it's a sniper, a minefield, or... I think in version 4 they removed the flamethrower part, so... Unless it's a minefield or a sniper, basically. Regimental standard, basically everybody near the guy with the flag automatically passes all their motivation tests because they are so honored to be under the banner of the rising sun. It's one of the sillier rules, in my opinion, when it comes to history, because Japanese soldiers, while they did like fighting under the rising sun, they didn't necessarily do everything amazingly because of it. So basically, these two mean that you can always attack in version 3. That's removed in version 4. But if you are attacking in both version 3 and version 4, you get to do so at night. So that can let you move up the board really quickly. And your troops move normally at night, and your tanks move what I like to call suicidally fast in the darkness. Because Japanese tankers were, well, they weren't better trained, but they were more reckless with their tanks. You never think of it because of how we think of the Pacific Theater, but Japan was only behind the Soviet Union and France during the interwar period when it came to tank production. So they had a lot of tanks. Even this late in the war, they still had a lot of tanks to be able to deploy. So if you lose a few tanks in maneuvers, but lose a lot less than you would attacking in the day, it was absolutely worth it. So artillery, their big thing is fire bursts, which means that their 2-gun batteries can still fire as a full 4-gun battery when it comes to like rerolls to hit and such, which is really effective. You have the Type 92 70mm battalion gun. Basically it gets to fire as a mortar, because they basically were mortars. They were tiny, tiny artillery pieces. They were man-portable even. So, tanks have duty to the end. Oh, duty to the end is the one that, one of those... Oh, no surrender is really dissension. Sorry. Duty to the end is the one I described over here. So, it's the one where tanks still fight on, basically. They also get hip shot, which means that all their tank teams get to re-roll the hit if they're within 16 inches of the enemy and have moved, which is really nice. It doesn't necessarily reflect history. Well, it makes you play like the Japanese actually fought. So Japanese commanders would rush into engagements as fast as possible, try and turn their guns and fire into the enemy side armor, because their guns would do nothing to the front armor of even a Stuart. So you'd have to get into the enemy side armor, or preferably their rear armor if you could. And even if you had what were called, what are they called? Sorry. Shinhoto tanks, which were the heavy anti-tank tanks. They wouldn't suffice against Sherman front armor unless they were very close. So you basically rush forward a screen of cheap old tanks, and then a few Shinhotos behind them. And the Shinhoto would be able to close in and destroy them. I've seen pictures from the Philippines where American tanks are literally 5 feet from a destroyed Shinhoto tank. It's insane how close they would try and get in order to just, be able to do anything to the American tanks. It took a lot of bravery. I think that kind of defines the Japanese army in this period. In version 3, the captured M3 Stuarts cannot use this rule. In version 4, they can. Japanese turret MGs, basically you have an MG on the back of your turret. You can spin your turret around to fire it. The rest, your main gun can't fire while you do that, because the gunner for the main gun had to scoot over to shoot the machine gun. Kind of like how some Russian tanks had the coaxial way over, so the gunner had to actually move over so he couldn't fire the main gun at the same time. It was a silly design system, both in the Japanese and the Soviet designs, but it means you can't fire your main gun while you're firing your turret MG, which doesn't matter in version 4, because you can't fire your machine guns and your turrets at the same time. You got dug-in tanks, basically the Yosai Hoti Chutai. Special rules are the same as any what are they called? Fortified platoon. Your tanks have to be dug in if they're on the table, and your troops always start dug in. It also includes that it has both Pacific and late war points, which I personally love. I really wish they had done Vietnam that way. I mean, I will be reviewing that, the Flames of War Vietnam, if you guys would like, but I'm kind of disappointed with it from what I've seen online. I will also be reviewing Avanti soon. So, basically, here is your Hohi Chutai, your infantry company. The basic force you're probably going to run if you're playing Japan. This is what you want to go for. If you're playing normal Japan, you want to be a bit competitive. You want to at least bring one Hohi Chutai in version 4, because you can bring more than one platoon or company. So you get to pick it as either Fearless Vet or Competent Trained. Personally, I would have listed... They say that it's basically to represent the conscripts or like Navy troopers or something. But Competent Trained, I think, doesn't fit Japan at all. They should be at least Fearless Trained, or Fearless Conscript even. But Fearless Veteran, I also really don't think that fits any of the main fighting forces in the Pacific. Maybe the Battle of the Philippines I would give Fearless Vet, because they shipped over a lot of the Manchurian forces for that offensive. But over here you get to see the basic organization. You can bring up to 3 Hohi platoons, which can get very expensive if you're bringing Fearless Vets. You can bring machine guns or weapons platoons, and a second machine gun platoon, battalion guns, rapid fire guns, regimental guns, then all sorts of support, self-propelled guns, artillery, even naval gunfire, light anti-aircraft, air support, including the famous Zero, and all sorts of that good stuff. But we shall move over to look at the units as we go. So, basically, Pacific War points and the late war points are the same for infantry, as far as I've noticed. The Pacific War points are compatible with early war if your opponent would like to do like a early war, like, British force to represent the Australians or New Zealanders fighting the Japanese. You could use the Pacific War points for that, though do be careful. There are a few things, not too many, but a few things in this book that weren't available in the early war period. I'll try to point them out to you guys as they come along, so that way you can actually play with a early war point. I do really enjoy Japanese history, so I've looked into this a lot over the years, so I should be able to identify everything that wasn't properly available at the time that the book itself doesn't point out. Anyway, the big difference for your HQ unit is that you can bring a regimental standard for 75 points, and in my opinion, just always bring that. Always, every time. Because that automatically passing every test is just amazing. I mean, rather than give him reroll, have your company commander give them just auto passing. I mean, I think we can all agree that that is worth 75 points every single time. And then we get your standard rifle squads, where you can get them either for 335 points veteran or 215 points for trained. That is for 3 rifle squads, and it goes down as you go. However, here's the interesting thing. Your platoons get a light mortar team, also known as a knee mortar team, from an American serviceman who thought they were fired by putting it on top of your knee, tried it, broke his entire leg. So, that's where they got the name the knee mortar. But they were just light mortars. They have a 4-up firepower. That's their difference from the rifles. Personally, I don't really like having them in there, but I think it's nice that you get them for free at least. In addition, you can see you can replace up to 1 rifle team per rifle squad with a Nikuhaku team before deployment, but after you see the enemy forces. So if they're bringing all tank list, you're going to fill your platoons with Nikuhaku forces. You can also model the unit with banners for 25 points, which can depend on if you want to do. I think that's more of a personal taste thing, unlike the regimental standard, which, again, just you always take it. You get MGs. The actual fun thing about MGs is that you would be completely right taking the French Great War machine guns. Yeah, the Japanese were using some pretty old equipment for their machine guns at this point, but they did get them really cheap historically, so that's what they liked. In-game, they work just like any other machine gun, so you don't have to worry about anything. It's just flavor. You get 4 of them for 160 points veteran, or 110 points trained, or 2 of them for just over half on both. Then you get weapons platoons, where you can bring heavy machine guns for the same price as above, or anti-tank rifles, 2 for 60 points veteran, or 2 for 40 points trained. I would say that the anti-tank rifles are probably worth it, but on the other hand, I've mostly faced mechanized lists. Actually, I've entirely faced mechanized lists when it comes to my Flames of War games, so I've faced a lot of half-tracks, which anti-tank rifles are good against in late war. And then you get a battalion platoon, or a battalion gun platoon. So this is basically a mortar. You get it for 70 points veteran or 50 points trained. The only difference is it goes on a slightly bigger base. Yeah, actually, that's really the only difference. In version 3, you get the exact same rules as mortars do, and in version 4, yeah, you fire like any other artillery gun, and again, the Japanese have fire burst special rules, so it doesn't matter that you only have 2 guns, they still fire as 4, because your men can scream at the top of their lungs, Banzai, unlike any other faction, which I assume is what makes guns fire faster. Then you get trucks, really not worth it, as far as I'm concerned. I don't see the point of trucks, I'll be honest. No offense, but I guess I play version 4. If you play version 3, and you guys like trucks, maybe explain why in the comments, so that way you guys can shed the wisdom on the rest of us. rapid fire guns. So these are basically your anti-tank guns. They come dirt cheap in late war. 45 points for veteran for the cheapest one. And again, in version 3 or version 4, you get the points rebate for the command team. So it's only 35 points for 2 anti-tank guns, which is unholy cheap. And then you've got a nice little artillery piece where you can bring either 1 or 2. I don't know why you'd just bring 1, though. Fireburst special rule only applies to 2 guns. I gotta put a quick cut in here, guys, because my camera is running out of time. I will be right back. And we're back. I doubt you'd even notice if I hadn't have told you, right? Yeah, unfortunately my camera can only record half an hour at a time, and apparently we were already out of time there. I'm sorry for rambling. I'll include a little timestamp in the video description, I think, to signify where the actual review begins. Of the units, I should say. No, I think it's all important enough. We'll throw it all together. Anyway. So here you get the Sensha Rentai, which is the Japanese tank regiment. Now, as I love to mention on this show, if you've watched Girls und Panzer in the film, the Japanese team in that, not Orai, the actual Japanese team, the one, Chi Hatan, they perfectly exemplify what Japanese tank tactics were all about during World War II. You charge forward in mass and you get blown up before you can reach the enemy. So if you want to play historically, bring a bunch of tanks, run them at the enemy over open ground so that you can get blown up. Boom. It's Alan's top tip of the day. Now, with Sensha Rentai, you get the same options as before, Fearless Veteran, but this time instead you get Fearless Trained instead of Confident Trained. I believe that all Japanese forces should be considered fearless. But hey, that's just me. Again, I imagine the reason is that you would have to be fearless in order just to climb into one of these tanks. They were metal death traps by late war. When they first came out, they were wonderful machines. Unfortunately, the mainstay of your forces in this book came out in 1929, so they're a little bit out of date. And even your good tank, the Chi Ha, came out at the same time as the Panzer I, Panzer II. Hell, they saw the Panzer III during a trade show in the 40s, early 40s, I think 41 or 42, and thought, man, that would make an amazing battle tank, while they were being outdated in the Soviet Union. So yeah, just let that put in perspective how shit Japanese tanks are. But hey, here's the thing. You basically get to play like a Soviet player. You bring tons of them. And unlike the Soviet player, you get bonuses for your tanks. These things are infantry killers. You won't face a tank force with a Japanese tank force, but face an infantry force with a Japanese tank force and you'll be laughing all the way home. Because Japanese tanks can sustain fire from small arms. They can't sustain anti-tank guns, they can't sustain, hell, they can't even sustain 50 cals at close range. But they can sustain infantry fire really well. And, because of Japanese special rules, they exemplify in assaults. So, sorry, I do get carried away, but I think that's what you're here for. So, you get to basically choose between I don't understand this difference here. Oh, okay, sorry. I had a derp. So, you can basically either take 2 Chihas or 2 Chiro. Chiro. I think that's misprinted. Sorry. 2 Chiha or 2 Chiro as your main tanks. These will be your company commander and your second in command. Chiha were the modern tank. They were the ones equivalent to a Panzer II. That was the top-of-the-line Japanese armor of the war. And I'm disturbed to say that that's not my usual melodrama. That's actually true. They were the finest Japanese tank to see frontline service. You can upgrade either or both of them to Shinhoto tanks, which gives you a much better chance against enemy armor, for 20 points per tank. And then you can also include Ha-Go tanks, which were often used as messengers. And again, this shows poor Japanese thinking, because most of their tanks weren't equipped with radios. So your commander would send a runner tank instead. Which is, I don't know, it worked out actually. It worked really well, inadvertently. Because the Japanese didn't realize we had cracked their codes, but we did crack their codes, and then because their tanks wouldn't communicate wirelessly, wouldn't be able to tell what their tanks were doing, which was a really cool inadvertent advantage to having crappy old outdated tanks. So yeah, you get to take 2 Chihas for 80 points or 2 Chiros for 70 points. I would never take the Chiros, I'll be honest, for your commander. Because even if you want to take the rest of your forces Chiros, be my guest. But your commander, you want to be safe. So you want that front armor 2, side armor 2. That's the impressiveness of Japanese tanks. And then adding the Ha-Gos, again, I would probably do it every time, because those are basically extra wounds. You can just kind of shrug it off onto them. And now you get to see Japanese tank organization. And this is true to life, especially in the Philippines, which is, I believe, what this is meant to represent. You would feel just huge numbers of Japanese tanks in order to just try and overcome the handful of Shermans that America deployed. You can bring HQ platoons for each company, but you don't have to. You can bring up to 5 Chihas for 200 points veteran or 150 points trained. Or you can bring Chiros for 175 points or 130 points trained. You can also upgrade your Chihas to Shinhotos for 20 points or 15 points for veteran and trained respectively. Historically, you would have your platoon set up so you'd have 3 units of Chihas, standard, 1 unit of Chiros with Shinhoto turrets, and 1 unit of... Actually, you usually have 1 unit of Ha-Gos for scouting, but in the Philippines they would often have to substitute a unit of Chiros because basically they didn't have enough Ha-Gos to go around. And they would separate the Ha-Gos into the light units. So that's why I think this is meant to represent the Philippines, rather than other engagements Japan was in, because the Ha-Gos are separate from the rest of the tanks. You'd also typically bring 5 of these units as a Japanese force rather than just 3, but you can easily achieve that with force organization, so I'm not going to rag on that at all. Especially because you don't have to take all 3. You can take up to 3. And each of these operate separately, I should add, which is true to life, and it makes them way more advantageous than Soviet Union forces, which kind of have to move as a giant parking lot, as it's called. Ha-Gos are 190 points for veteran or 150 points for trained. Again, that's a full unit of 5. So, barely less expensive than Chihas for really no kind of equilibrium. They have front armor, side armor, top armor 1. Chihas have front armor, side armor 2, top armor 1. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but it does mean rifles don't even have a chance of hurting you. So that's a really big advantage in my opinion. Because even if it's a minuscule chance, it's still a chance. And the last thing you want is your tank force wiped off the face of the earth by riflemen. That would be embarrassing, wouldn't it? You can also replace up to 5 in the entire platoon with, or in the entire company, sorry, so all 3 of these. You can replace up to 1 of the individual platoons, so up to 5 of them, with M3 Stuarts, which would ironically be the heaviest tank in the Japanese arsenal. And it is only 15 points per tank to upgrade for veteran, and only 5 points to upgrade for trained. If you're taking trained ones, I definitely recommend that upgrade, because then your front armor is 3, and you have the second best gun available of the Japanese. The only sad thing is that you get unreliable. So, it is a little bit of a trade-off there. Next, you get the Yosai Hohi Chutai, the Fortified Infantry Company. This is what we think of when we think of the Japanese war. You know, we think of the Flags of Our Fathers, we think of Letters from Iwo Jima. This is what that force is. These are the forces that defended the Japanese home isles, basically. Again, you get the choice of Fearless Veteran, Confident Trained. Now you get to take their company commander. Again, I always recommend the standard 100% every time. 100 points for Veteran, 80 points for Trained. You get a machine gun nest, barbed wire entanglement, a trench line, and, of course, the commander and the 2IC, hopefully with a banner. Then you can bring barbed wire, same as barbed wire anywhere, 10 points of barbed wire, and you can bring up to 9 of them, but a minimum of 2 if you bring any. You can bring anti-tank obstacles. Japan is unique in what I've seen so far in the fact that you can bring 4 of them rather than just I believe 2 was the maximum in Fortress Italy. Then, of course, you can bring minefields, again, up to 4 of them. The Japanese were true masters of mine warfare, from what I've read. They were able to disguise their mines well, so you would not really know that you were in a minefield, per se. They didn't really have minefields. They just placed them around randomly to keep the enemy on edge. What the Japanese lacked in equipment, they really did make up for in psychological warfare, which is unfortunately not represented too well in the game. But they try in other ways. You can buy gun pits, which are cheapish chips. 25 points for 4 of them, 15 points for 2 of them. Sorry, the minefields are 50 points each, and the anti-tank obstacles are 100 points each. I do recommend this formation, by the way, if you want to have a fortified one. Then you can bring extra trenches. Again, these ones are 10 points for 2 of them, basically 5 points each, up to 6. You have to buy them 2 at a time. And then you get your standard Yoshi Hohei platoon. You can also bring a normal Hohei platoon. You get 360 points for 2 rifle squads veteran, or 360 points, or 245 points for them trained. You can add a light mortar team. I don't think it's worth it. You can replace your HMG nests with HMG pillboxes for 40 points, either one, which seems really good to me. You can also replace it with various anti-tank guns in either nests or pillboxes, which could be worth it, to be honest, depending on what you're facing, of course. You're the one who will know your enemy better than I will. For the viewer who requests this video, I definitely recommend always bringing the cheap Japanese anti-tank guns against your half-track opponents, because they work wonders. Again, you get to replace 1 rifle team with a Nikuhaku team, which is quite nice, and you can add banners for 25 points, though I definitely say this isn't quite worth it for these guys, because you're mostly going to have them cowering in trenches rather than running forward and attacking. So you have the Kaimi Sensha Chutai, which is Amphibious Tank Company. I'm going to kind of skip over this one because it's not really worth it. It's just genuinely don't take this unless you're playing a themed game, in which case that's cool. That sounds like a lot of fun. But you get either Fearless Veteran or Confident Trained, 85 points for the HQ and 2IC, 95 points for up to 5 of them, Veteran, and 140 points for Trained. Again, I don't think this will ever be worth it unless you're playing a themed game. However, it is interesting to note that the Kaimi was the best amphibious tank of the war, and was often used as a basis for post-war designs by both the Soviet Union and the United States, because the Japanese were really good at making amphibious tanks. You'd hardly lose any of them. You get Battle of Guadalcanal. You do get a few little cool special rules if you're playing a themed game. Again, it's the only situation in which I think you'd ever bring a lot of this stuff. By that I mean these tanks. These tanks are the Marine tanks. But the Marine tanks are better, at least. And then you get onto the divisional support. So you have to bring it either as Fearless Veteran or Confident Trained, depending on what your main unit was. You also get a Tank Platoon, which is again Fearless Trained. But this is if you're bringing a pure infantry force. You can add a few tanks to it, up to 5. But over here you get the interesting thing, the self-propelled gun. By the way, these amphibious tanks are not for early war. They did not see action until the mid-war time period. But the self-propelled gun platoons, they are good, in my opinion, because you get a lot of shots, pretty good for Japan, armor penetration, good firepower, and you can fire them as artillery if push comes to shove. You can see their points cost right there. I'm not going to read it out. You can use none of these in early war, except for the captured M375 GMCs, which were captured in 41, technically. The very tail end of 41, but 41. So if you want to really push it, you could probably use that. Then you get engineers, 4 of them. 4 engineer squads for 420 points, veteran, or 270 points trained. You can really see where the savings add up, and you can bring a much bigger force trained. Again, I like this for the same reason I like Desperate Measures, because basically you're offering something for new players. You bring a veteran force, and experienced players can bring a trained force and just field waves upon waves of models. Now, the big difference here is that you get all Pioneer rifles instead, and you can bring 2 Nikuhaku teams per squad rather than 1. So if you want, you can only have 4 rifles and 8 Nikuhaku teams for your force in this one, which is pretty awesome. You can also replace up to 2 rifle teams with flamethrowers. That's in the entire unit, so hypothetically you could have 2 rifle teams, 8 Nikuhaku teams, and 2 flamethrowers, because why not? You're playing Japan. You might as well. Then you can bring some recon tanks. The Type 97 Keihi, or TK, is actually an early war tank. I'm not sure why it wasn't in Banzai, or what was it called? Rising Sun, the other Japanese book that is for early war. Honestly, these were available since the 37, so I don't see why they decided not to put them in the early war. But they served up through the end of the war. They were still prepared for defending the home island, so they're perfectly fine late war, early war, whenever. You can bring them for 90 points for 2 of them, veteran, 60 points for 2 of them trained, or 135 points for 3 of them veteran, 90 points for 3 of them trained. Version 4, definitely recommend just taking the minimum squad here if you're going to bring these guys. But I would bring them over this just because they're cheaper. And then you get scouts, 140 points for 3 scout squads trained, or veteran, and 90 points for them trained. Scouts got a major nerf in version 4, so I don't recommend taking the infantry ones. I do recommend taking the tanks, though. They're quite nice. And you get medium mortars. Medium mortars do not use fireburst special roll, so you do have to bring 4 of them if you want to fire like a normal artillery piece. You can bring 4 Type 97s for 145 points veteran, 95 points trained. Honestly, I'm going to let you guys kind of just look at the points from now on. My throat's starting to hurt a little from narrating so much. And you get field artillery, which does use this fireburst special roll, but I think Japanese artillery is really overcosted for what it does. Honestly, I probably wouldn't bring it. Maybe the light Type 37s. I definitely wouldn't bring anything from the heavy artillery. So, that's my opinion. I mean, if you want to show me, I guess if you're playing a big point game, you can bring these guys. I generally play a smaller 1500 point game, so you could see where my bias lies. And then you get the heavy anti-aircraft gun platoons, which is the Type 88 75mm gun, which you can bring for 85 points veteran for 2 of them, or 50 points trained for 2 of them. You can also add extra loaders for rate of fire 3 for 10 points each, which I recommend that upgrade, and I recommend these guns, because just like the German guns, you don't have them firing up in the air, you just lay them flat and have them shoot at the tanks. Funny story actually, the Type 88 75mm gun had a mistranslation by American intelligence, so they actually thought that they had imported and were producing German 88s, because they would call them 88s, referring to Type 88, not like German 88s where it was 8.8 centimeters, or 88 millimeters. So they thought these were German guns, basically. They were really scared of them for that reason. But they were completely different. They had a completely different caliber and everything. We didn't realize that until later in the war when we actually captured some. But I thought that was just cool because, you're hearing it over the radio, you're thinking, oh, this must be like the 88s we always hear about in Europe. Well, no. They're just 75mm guns that happen to be called Type 88s. And then you have Type 98s, 20mm guns, which are nice light machine guns, good for dealing with entrenched infantry. You get them for 105 points veteran for 4 of them, or 70 points trained for 4 of them. Again, I do love the fact that they split the trained and the veterans so you can bring a nice horde. And then you get naval gunfire support. Bring the minimum if you're bringing any, because I don't think it really is worth it to scale it up to a heavy cruiser. Heavy cruisers are 300 points, light cruisers are 250 points, and destroyers are 150 points. Destroyers are impressive enough as it is. But honestly, I think they should be able to... They should be able to probably target tanks a little bit better, because I don't know about you, but I've never seen a tank that could resist a shell from a 210mm gun. So, 210mm gun. That was a Japanese heavy cruiser's main gun. So, that's a railway gun on shore. So, yeah, I don't find it very realistic that a Sherman can bounce that guy's shot half the time. I'm sure you don't either. You can also bring priority air and sea support. Now this is really good, especially in version 4. So the way it works in version 4 is if you buy a carrier, you get a 3-up. If you buy a aircraft single carrier, you get a 4-up, and if you buy a destroyer squadron, you get a 5-up. But if you succeed that dice roll, your enemy can't bring in any planes. Or you can choose to have it interrupt their naval gunfire, regardless of which country's firing naval guns. So that is just perfect. Basically, you're paying 60 points to negate your enemy's air support, which is at least 100 points. So yeah, I can't speak highly enough of that. Then you get your Mitsubishi Zero, which is perfect. I like it. It's a fun plane. It's cool seeing it all painted up. I wouldn't bring it personally. I think it's really overcosted for what it does, especially with close air support. But what are you going to do? You get the standard Japanese arsenal. There's all your arsenal stuff, including the crummy Japanese tanks. And then you get basic painting guides. I do love how Japanese tanks are painted. I love that yellow stripe on them. And then you get Battle of Iwo Jima, finally, with a few extra little special rules. Then that's it. It's a nice, simple little supplement, which I somehow spent an hour making a review for you guys. So, that was a lot more painful than it had to be. Let me sum up my thoughts. It's a good supplement for what it is. I'm thankful it's cheaper than most of the others. But I don't think it does enough to justify its $20 price tag. If you like the Japanese, I recommend it, of course, because you have literally no other option in late war. But I believe they could have done so much more with it. It makes me so sad. They could have done Japanese forces in everywhere. Basically, you could have had Japanese Manchurian forces with German half-tracks. And you could have had Japanese island forces, which were these fearless conscripts that would hurl themselves at the enemy in a vain attempt to just slow them down just for a day. And just stop the bombing of the home islands for one more day. And you'd have Japanese Marines, which carried submachine guns into battle at all times, so you'd have big SMG teams. Or Japanese paratroopers, which were incredibly well trained, and would be masters of sneaking into areas and setting off bombs, so you could have like SAS type special roles for them, which I think would be really fun. You could even include like a fictional part, which you could have a big disclaimer on it that says make sure your opponent is okay with non-historical lists before you play, and have it be Operation what's it called? Olympic? No, that's D-Day, isn't it? Operation Downfall, I think. which is the invasion of Japan. And you could include a few of the Japanese tanks that never actually saw combat that were actually half decent. Things that were equivalent to a Panzer IV, for instance. That was the high point of Japanese tank technology. But they also had interesting tank destroyers, one that looks a lot like a Sturmtiger almost, but without all the armor, so it was unarmored but it had a gigantic gun. I guess more like a Karl than a Sturmtiger. But you could have had those, and you could have had Japanese palace guards, which were the best trained in the Imperial Japanese Army. You could have had citizens with sticks running forward. Because as the Japanese high command said in the waning days of the war, we will lose 25 million people, but we will win the war if they invade. Which is disturbing that they were that willing to sacrifice their own people. I really do hate Japanese generals as much as I admire the courage of the fighting people. But, as usual, that's my thoughts. That's my little historical rant on it. I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, leave me a comment. Tell me what you want to see. This is entirely based on the fact that I saw somebody who said, hey, could you do a review on Japanese forces? And I asked him, which type of Japanese forces would you like? And he said, late war is what my friends play. So I was like, yeah. And you know what? This is the same day that he made that comment. So I decided to come home after work and sit down and make this review. It took me an hour of my life, but I think that's absolutely worth it. I do this for... actually, you know what? I'm not even going to lie to you guys. I do it for my own ego. But it's you guys who feed that. You know, by making the videos for you, quote unquote, it makes me feel better about myself. So, you know, tell me what you guys want. And if you liked it, give it a like. If you disliked it, dislike it, and leave me a comment. Tell me how to improve. Tell me to ramble a little bit less, maybe. Subscribe if you want to see some more. And, actually, you know what? This is the end of the video. So, go subscribe. Go wait for the next one. But I will be telling you guys what I'm going to be doing down the line a little bit. So, this Saturday, well, this Monday, actually, because I'm not off till Monday, I will be going to get Malign Portents for Age of Sigmar, and also Legions of Nagash for Age of Sigmar, and I will be doing the book reviews on that following Tuesday. They will be up on YouTube. So if you like Age of Sigmar, or if you know anybody who likes Age of Sigmar, tell them to stay tuned for that. It'll be just like these book reviews where I go way into too much depth, talk about all the lore of Age of Sigmar, talk about the world that was, and all sorts of stuff like that. And then I'm also planning to do a Warhammer 8th edition review of a book. I'm not going to tell you guys which one, but I'm planning to do that. And then after that, whoever suggests another version 3 or version 4 book that I own will get that one reviewed. So, basically, you guys have 3 non-Flames of War book reviews, because I feel like I've been delving too much into Flames of War. I'm a lot more even than I let out to be. You guys have just been such a loyal audience that I wanted to make more of these videos. So you got 2 Age of Sigmar, an 8th edition fantasy, and then more Flames of War, as you guys request. I will also be at Dundracon. If anybody is going that way, drop me a comment, let me know. I will be there to play some Twilight Imperium, which is my favorite board game. I will probably be picking up 4th edition and making a review of it at some point. Anyway, that's going to be it. I'm almost out of time on this length of filming too, so leave me a like, leave me a dislike, comment, please comment, I do love the comments, and subscribe, and I will see you guys on the next video. Toodles!